Yo, what's up everybody? Welcome back for another episode of Into the Floo. In today's episode, we're going to do a deck tech where we've got Professor McGonagall as a starting character and it working perfectly with Care Magical Creatures. So she provides a Transfiguration lesson power, and once per game, you may discard the adventure your opponent has played and you don't get the reward. So this is a really good starting character. And again, working perfectly well with Care Magical Creatures. That combination is something that I think a lot of people really like. So we've got 4 Steel Claw that we're using. All of your creatures do damage to your opponent. This is really good because as you start to stack up some of these creatures, then you have the ability to just have a Steel Claw do a bunch of damage, and that can hopefully either be like a really big hit or one of the hits in the game that kind of, get them out of here. So that's a really good card to have. We've got Dobby's Disappearance, 4 of them, and then we've got Platform 9 3/4. So 9 3/4 is kind of one of those cards where I'm still playing around to see if it's needed in this deck. Needed, with air quotes. We'll kind of see. I don't love using this card, to be honest, and I've got Dobby's Disappearance that allows me that extra lesson anyway, so it might be one of those cards that I'm kind of getting rid of. But as always with all of these decks, just look and see what I've got and you can adjust them as you want. This is the deck as I have it. It's been pretty successful for me, even though I haven't really used Platform 9 3/4, so it's sort of taken up space that I need to figure out. Maybe adding a different Transfiguration card in there, adding another creature, something like that. But nonetheless, I have used it a couple times, and it is what it is. So Dobby's Disappearance, of course, is your standard, amazing Dobby's Disappearance card, and it choose one of your opponent's cards in play, other than his or her character, of course, and return it to their hand, and you get one more action. So because you get that one more action, it really ends up working well because, of course, if you're able to get your creatures out, then you can kind of not do damage because you're just returning the card to their hand, but you're sort of setting them back in a way while your creatures are doing damage. So that's always a plus. So what creatures do we have? We've got Welsh Green Dragon, 4 of those. Welsh Green Dragon. To play this card, discard 2 of your Care Magical Creature lessons from play. When you play this card, do 6 damage to your opponent. So this does 6 damage kind of like right away. The way that a black bat would. The second you put it into play, it does 2 damage. So of course you have to discard 2 of those lessons, but honestly, that's okay because it does 6 damage right away. And then on your next turn, if your opponent has no way of returning Welsh Green Dragon to your hand or discarding it completely, it's doing another 6 damage in a short period of time. So especially if you got a couple of these stacked up. I don't know if lessons will allow to have all of these, but depending on how you build your deck, you might be able to pull off at least having a couple in there. We've got 2 Hedwig because Hedwig is unique. So even if I manage to pull a Hedwig, I can only have 1 in play. So unique cards are very similar to starting characters. So you and your opponent can have the same starting character, but let's say my opponent has a Neville starting character, they cannot play a Professor McGonagall, like just in addition to their starting character because I already have it in play. So if I have Hedwig in play, I can't play 2 of them, and if I have Hedwig in play, my opponent can't play Hedwig. So anyway, just a little tidbit there. So when you play this card, you may put a non-healing card from your discard pile into your hand. So this is good, of course, because not only does Hedwig do that 1 damage, but it also kind of helps you into taking a non-healing card from your discard pile. So that's always a plus. So we've got 2 of those. I love the gargoyles, especially when playing against your opponent that doesn't have a creature deck. So Marble Gargoyle and Sandstone Gargoyle. So we've got Marble Gargoyle, which costs 5, and it says when Marble Gargoyle does damage to your opponent, if he or she doesn't have any creature in play, it does 3 more damage to him or her. So that would be a total of 5 damage, right? So if you're playing against someone that's got like a Transfiguration deck, a Spell deck, a Charms deck, something that doesn't have creatures in it, then this can stack up pretty heavily, and it definitely has for me. One of the shortest games I've played was with this deck because I was just, it was luck of the draw, right? I just got lucky. I was able to play a lot of these between marble and sandstone, and then it just kind of continued to add up, and they just couldn't keep up with that damage, which is the goal. So Sandstone Gargoyle is very similar, and that it says when Sandstone Gargoyle does damage to your opponent, if he or she doesn't have any creatures in play, it does 2 more damage to him or her. So again, that's creatures in play, right? So even though you might be playing against a creature deck, you know, they might not have creatures in play, at least for a little while, and then you can still do that damage. So even though this is 3 damage, and then without that, if they do have a creature in play, it's only 1, but still, you know, it adds up. You know, that's why playing even an owl deck, for example, all the owls do 1 damage. Even if you don't have Owl Emporium, it still does a pretty decent amount of damage. So, and I have an owl deck on my channel on this playlist, I believe. So if you want to check that out, you are more than welcome to do so. Let's take a look at the adventures. So we've got 4 Hagrid Needs Help, which is a pretty cool adventure. Your opponent gets 1 fewer actions on each of his or her turns, even the turn this adventure is solved. If this would mean your opponent has fewer than 1 actions, then of course they still get 1 action. So to solve it, your opponent takes 8 damage, and the reward is your opponent may draw 3 cards. Sometimes the reward isn't really worth it, right? So very similar to a Caught by Snape, which we're going to see in here as well. The reward is sometimes not really worth it because, you know, if you play this back to back, right, because we have a couple of them in here, drawing 3 cards while you're doing some of that damage, you might be thinking, well, if you draw the card, it could benefit them because they're drawing 3 and maybe they have a character, or I'm sorry, a creature or something like that in their deck that they're waiting to pull. It's possible, but either way, they're still lowering their deck amount, and that's kind of the whole point of the game is to deck out. So we got a few of these, which I dig, and we've got Riding the Centaur, which is one of my personal favorites. Oh, here we go. Yeah. I was like, wait, where'd that Caught by Snake go? So we've got 2 Riding the Centaur, prevent all damage done by your opponent's creatures. This is always good, of course, whether you're, you know, if you're playing. I sometimes have these even in non-creature decks because, you know, you never know what your opponent's going to play. And then you can sort of play this while they have some creatures stacked up, and then hopefully find a way to get rid of the creatures while this is in play, you know, kind of buffering you from that damage. So this is always good. Prevent all damage done by your opponent's creatures. To solve it, your opponent chooses 4 of his or her cards in play and returns them to their hand. And then the reward is your opponent may draw a card. So it's always good to kind of use this once they have a few creatures in play instead of just 1 or 2. It might be a pain because you're taking some of that damage, but you know that they're going to stack up creatures anyway because that's the point of their deck. But you know, again, it's fun to have no matter which way you do it, and that's a really good option. I think everybody knows Caught by Snape. That's one of the dramatic cards, you know, that exist in the game. I only have 2 copies in here, but it sucks either way. So your opponent can't use actions to play any cards except lesson cards. To solve it, your opponent uses actions to play lesson cards 3 times, and those actions don't need to be one right after the other. And then the reward is your opponent may put any number of lesson cards from his or her hand into play. So earlier I mentioned Caught by Snape and how the reward isn't really beneficial, and the reason I say that is just from experience. So I was playing someone, they played a Caught by Snape, I solved it relatively quickly, and this was early on when I was kind of learning some of the strategic stuff, but, you know, it said you can put any number of lesson cards from your hand into play. So I put, I want to say 1 or 2 more. I had a few more lessons in my hand. I didn't do all of them. At least I had the foresight to not do that. But I did put 1 or 2, and then right after I solved it, they played another Caught by Snape. So because of that back-to-back Caught by Snape, I could have used those lessons that I played as my reward. I could have used them to solve that second Snape. So now I never put my lessons in as my reward. It's just, you know, sometimes I don't even need it anyway, or you know, Caught by Snape doesn't have to be that much of an intimidating card. It is sucky, but you know, it's very seldom, and I've never been able to solve it, or it is my demise or something like this. You know, it ends up being a pain. But either way, you know, it's totally cool. And then we've got some extra characters in here. So we've got Madame Pomfrey. Once per game, you may shuffle up to 12 non-healing cards from your discard pile. and put them into your deck. So I've got a couple of those. I've got Peeves. Once per game, you may discard your hand and then draw 7 cards to make your opponent discard his or her hand and then draw 7 cards. So Peeves is pretty cool. You know, I've used Peeves a couple times, and I have a character deck that I'm kind of playing around with, and Peeves definitely comes into play for that. And then I'm playing around with having Ginny in here. So these are obviously some proxy type cards for Ginny. Ginny will allow you an extra action for every extra character that you have in play, aside from her. So, you know, actions are a really big component in this game, and you want to make sure that you have them. So, you know, that's where kind of like Dobby's disappearance comes into play. You know, even just having 9 3/4, wherever that is, you know, just having that in play. You know, but either way, you know, it ends up being pretty good. So I don't know, Ginny works out, but I might end up switching Ginny in that 9 3/4. But anyway, you know, obviously you do whatever it is that you want to do with your decks, and as we play, hopefully if you're in the league, you know, we can get some games in whenever you have a chance, and we'll kind of figure it out. And then the rest of the cards are just going to be lesson cards. So, you know, you can adjust however many lessons you want. This is like 20 something lessons, and that's the deck. So that is McGonagall's Care Magical Creature and Transfiguration deck. If you end up building this deck or a deck similar, then, you know, please leave your comments or questions that you may have, and, you know, make any adjustments that you wish and bring it to the league. Join the Discord, and let's get some games in. Thanks for joining.